this reading of Brisingr. I'm sorry that these videos are getting compressed and released kind of all at once. I've been having a crazy time at home recently, and I was sick this Sunday, but I felt good enough to be here this evening on Monday, and I'm just really grateful for all of you that are here in Discord with me right now. So, without further diddly-diddly-do, we're doing part whatever the heck it is right now of Brisingr, and we're starting with the chapter that says, "For my love." Roran stared at the round, flat stone he held cupped in his hands. His eyebrows met in a scowl of frustration. "Stanarisa," he growled under his breath. The stone refused to budge. "What are you up to, strong hammer?" asked Karn, dropping onto the log where Roran sat. Slipping the stone into his belt, Roran accepted the bread and cheese Karn had brought him and said, "Nothing, just wool gathering." Karn nodded. "Most do before a mission." As he ate, Roran allowed his gaze to drift over the men he found himself with. Their group was 30 strong, himself included. They were all hardened warriors. Everyone carried a bow, and most also wore a sword, although a few chose to fight with a spear or with a mace or a hammer. Of the 30 men, he guessed that 7 or 8 were close to his own age, while the rest were several years older. The eldest among them was their captain, Martland Redbeard, the deposed Earl of Thune, who had seen enough winters that his famed beard had become frosted with silver hair. When Roran had first joined Martland's command, he had presented himself to Martland in his tent. The Earl was a short man, with powerful limbs from a lifetime of riding horses and wielding swords. His titular beard was thick and well-groomed and hung to the middle of his sternum. After looking Roran over, the Earl had said, "Lady Niswata has told me great things about you, my boy, and I've heard much else from the stories my men tell. Rumors, gossip, hearsay, and the like. You know how it is. No doubt you have accomplished notable feats. Bearding the Rozek in their own den, for example. Now there's a tricky piece of work. Of course, you had your cousin to help you, didn't you? You may be accustomed to having your way with the people from your village, but you're part of the Varden now, boy. More specifically, you are one of my warriors. We are not your family. We are not your neighbors. We're not even necessarily your friends. Our duty is to carry out Niswata's orders, and carry them out we will, no matter how many of us might feel about it. While you serve under me, you will do what I tell you, when I tell you, and how I tell you. Or I swear upon the bones of my blessed mother, may she rest in peace, I will personally whip the skin off your back, no matter to whom you may be related. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." "Very good. If you behave yourself and show you have some common sense, and if you can manage to stay alive, it is possible for a man of determination to advance quickly among the Varden. Whether you do or not, however, depends entirely on if I deem you fit to command men of your own. But don't you believe, not for one moment, not one blasted moment, that you can flatter me into a good opinion of you. I don't care whether you like or hate me. My only concern is whether you can do what needs to be done." "I understand perfectly, sir." "Yes, well, maybe you do that, strong hammer. We shall know soon enough. Leave and report to Ulhart, my right-hand man." Roran swallowed the last of his pride and washed it down with a swig of wine from the skin he carried. He wished they could have had a hot dinner that night. But they were deep in the Empire's territory, and soldiers might have spotted a fire. With a sigh, he stretched out his legs. His knees were sore from riding Snowfire from dusk until dawn for the past 3 days. In the back of his mind, Roran felt a faint but constant pressure, a mental itch that, night or day, pointed him in the same direction, the direction of Katrina. The source of the sensation was the ring Eragon had given him, and it was a comfort to Roran knowing that because of it, he and Katrina could find each other anywhere in Algasia, even if they were both blind and deaf. Beside him, he heard Karn muttering phrases in the ancient language, and he smiled. Karn was their spellcaster sent to ensure that an enemy magician could not kill them all with a wave of his hand. From some of the other men, Roran had gathered that Karn was not a particularly strong magician. He struggled to cast every spell, but that he compensated for his weakness by inventing extraordinarily clever spells, and by excelling at worming his way into his opponent's minds. Karn was thin of face and thin of body, with drooping eyes and a nervous, excitable air. Roran had taken an immediate liking to him. Across from Roran, two of the men, Halmar and Firth, were sitting in front of their tent, and Halmar was telling Firth, "So when the soldiers came for him, he pulled all his men inside his estate and set fire to the pools of oil his servants had poured earlier, trapping the soldiers and making it appear to those who came later as if the whole lot of them had burned to death. Can you believe it? 500 soldiers he killed at one go without even drawing a blade." "How did he escape?" Firth asked. "Redbeard's grandfather was a cunning bastard, he was. He had a tunnel dug all the way from the family hall to the nearest river. With it, Redbeard was able to get his family and all their servants out alive. He took them to Serta then, where King Larkin sheltered them. It was quite a number of years before Galbatorix learned they were still alive. We're lucky to be under Redbeard, to be sure. He's lost only 2 battles, and those because of magic." Halmar fell sound as Ulhart stepped into the middle of the row of the 16 tents that surrounded them. The grim-faced veteran stood with his legs spread, immovable as a deep-rooted oak, and surveyed the tents, checking that everyone was present. He said, "Sun's going down. Get some sleep. We ride out 2 hours before first light. Convoy should be 7 miles northwest of us. Make good time. We strike just as they start moving. Kill everyone and burn everything. And we go back. You know how it goes. Stronghammer, you'll ride with me. Mess up and I'll gut you with a dull fishhook." The men chuckled. "Right, get to sleep." Wind whipped Roran's face. The thunder of pulsing blood filled his ears, drowning out every other sound. Snowfire surged between his legs, galloping. Roran's vision had narrowed. He saw nothing but the 2 soldiers sitting on brown mares next to the second-last wagon of the supply train. Raising his hammer overhead, Roran howled with all his might. The 2 soldiers started and fumbled with their weapons and shields. One of them dropped his spear and bent to recover it. Pulling on Snowfire's reins to slow him, Roran stood upright in his stirrups and, drawing abreast of the first soldier, struck him on the shoulder, splitting his mail hauberk. The man screamed, his arm going limp. Roran finished him off quick with a backhand blow. The other soldier retrieved his spear, and he jabbed at Roran, aiming at his neck. Roran ducked behind his round shield, the spear jarring him each time it buried itself in the wood. He pressed his legs against Snowfire's sides, and the stallion reared, neighing and pawing at the air with iron-shod hooves. One hoof caught the soldier in the chest, tearing his red tunic. As Snowfire dropped to all fours again, Roran swung his hammer sideways and crushed the man's throat. Leaving the soldier thrashing on the ground, Roran spurred Snowfire toward the next wagon in the convoy, where Ulhart was battling 3 soldiers of his own. 4 oxen pulled each wagon, and as Snowfire passed the wagon, Roran had just captured. The lead ox tossed his head, and the tip of his left horn caught Roran in the lower part of his right leg. Roran gasped. He felt as if a red-hot iron had been laid against his shin. He glanced down and saw a flap of his boot hanging loose, along with a layer of his skin and muscle. With another battle cry, Roran rode up to the closest of the 3 soldiers Ulhart was fighting and felled him with a single swipe of his hammer. The next man evaded Roran's subsequent attack, then turned his horse and galloped away. "Get him!" Ulhart shouted, but Roran was already in pursuit. The fleeing soldier dug his spurs into the belly of his horse until the animal bled, but despite his desperate cruelty, his steed could not outrun Snowfire. Roran bent low over Snowfire's neck as the stallion extended himself, flying over the ground with incredible speed. Realizing flight was hopeless, the soldier reined in his mount, wheeled about, slashed at Roran with a saber. Roran lifted his hammer and barely managed to deflect the razor-sharp blade. He immediately retaliated with a looping overhead attack, but the soldier parried and slashed at Roran's arms and leg twice more. In his mind, Roran cursed. The soldier was obviously more experienced with swordplay than he was. If he could not win the engagement in the next few seconds, the soldier would kill him. The soldier must have sensed his advantage, for he pressed the attack, forcing Snowfire to prance backward. On 3 occasions, Roran was sure the soldier was about to wound him, but but the man's saber twisted at the last moment and missed Roran, diverted by an unseen force. Roran was thankful for Eragon's wards then. Having no other recourse, Roran resorted to the unexpected. He stuck his head and neck out and shouted, "Bah!" just as he would if he were trying to scare someone in a dark alleyway. The soldier flinched, and as he flinched, Roran leaned over and brought his hammer down on the man's left knee. The man's face went white with pain. Before he could recover, though, Roran struck him into the small of his back, and then as the soldier screamed and arched his spine, Roran ended his misery with a quick blow to the head. Roran sat panting for a moment, then tugged on Snowfire's reins and spurred him into a canter as they returned to the convoy, his eyes darting from place to place, drawn by any flicker of motion. Roran took stock of the battle. Most of the soldiers were already dead, as were the men who had been driving the wagons. By the lead wagon, Karn stood facing a tall man in robes, the two of them rigid except for an occasional twitches, the only sign of their invisible duel. Even as Roran watched, Karn's opponent pitched forward and lay motionless on the ground. By the middle of the convoy, however, 5 enterprising soldiers had cut the oxen loose from 3 wagons and had pulled the wagons into a triangle, from within which they were able to hold off Martland Redbeard and 10 of the other Varden. 4 of the soldiers poked spears between the wagons, while the 5th fired arrows at the Varden, forcing them to retreat behind the nearest wagon for cover. The archer had already wounded several of the Vardens, some of whom had fallen off their horses, others of whom had kept their saddles long enough to find cover. Roran frowned. They could not afford to linger out in the open on one of the Empire's main roads while they slowly picked off the entrenched soldiers. Time was against them. All the soldiers were facing west, the direction from which the Varden had attacked. Aside from Roran, none of the Varden had crossed to the other side of the convoy. Thus, the soldiers were unaware that he was bearing down on them from the east. A plan occurred to Roran. In any other circumstances, he would have dismissed it as ludicrous and impractical, but as it was, he accepted the plan as the only course of action that could resolve the standoff between them without further delay. He did not bother to consider the danger to himself. He had abandoned all fear of death and injury the moment their charge had begun. Roran urged Snowfire into a full gallop. He placed his left hand on the front of his saddle, edged his boots almost out of the stirrups, and gathered his muscles in preparation. When Snowfire was 50 feet away from the triangle of wagons, he pressed downward with his hand and, lifting himself, placed his feet on the saddle and stood crouched on Snowfire. It took all his skill and concentration to maintain his balance. As Roran had expected, Snowfire lessened his speed and started to veer to the side as the clustered wagons loomed large before them. Roran released the reins just as Snowfire turned and jumped off the horse's back, leaping high over the east-facing wagon of the triangle. His stomach lurched. He caught a glimpse of the archer's upturned face, the soldiers round and edged with white, then slammed into the man, and they both crashed to the ground. Roran landed on top of the soldier's body, cushioning his fall. Pushing himself onto his knees, Roran raised his shield and drove its rim through the gap between the soldier's helm and his tunic, breaking his neck. Then Roran shoved himself upright. The other 4 soldiers were slow to react. The one to Roran's left made the mistake of trying to pull his spear aside inside the triangle of wagons, but in his haste, he wedged the spear between the rear one wagon and the front wheel of another, and the shaft splintered in his hands. Roran lunged forward. The soldier tried to retreat, but the wagons blocked his way, swinging the hammer in an underhanded blow. Roran caught the soldier beneath his chin. The second soldier was smarter. He let go of his spear and reached for the sword at his belt, but only succeeded in drawing the blade halfway out of the sheath before Roran staved. What? But only succeeded in drawing the blade halfway out of the sheath before Roran staved it in his chest. The 3rd and 4th soldiers were ready for Roran by then. They converged on him, naked blades outstretched, snarls in their faces. Roran tried to sidestep them, but his torn leg failed him, and he stumbled and fell to one knee. The closest soldier slashed downward. With his shield, Roran blocked the blow, then dove forward and crushed the soldier's foot with the flat end of his hammer. Cursing, the soldier toppled to the ground. Roran promptly smashed the soldier's face, then flipped onto his back, knowing that the last soldier was directly behind them. Roran froze, his arms and legs splayed to either side. The soldier stood over him, holding his sword extended, the tip of the gleaming blade less than an inch away from Roran's throat. So this is how it ends, thought Roran. And then a thick arm appeared around the soldier's neck, yanking him backward, and the soldier uttered a choked cry as a sword blade sprouted from the middle of his chest, along with a spray of blood. The soldier collapsed into a limp pile, and in his place there stood Martland Redbeard. The Earl was breathing heavily, and his beard and chest were splattered with gore. Martland stuck his sword in the dirt, leaned on the pommel, and surveyed the carnage within the triangle of wagons. He nodded. "You'll do, I think." Roran sat on the... Dingus. Roran sat on the end of a wagon, biting his tongue as Karn cut off the rest of his boot, trying to ignore the stabs of agony from his leg. Roran gazed up at the vultures circling overhead and concentrated on the memories of his home in Palancar Valley. He grunted as Karn probed especially deep into the gash. "Sorry," said Karn. "I have to inspect the wound." Roran kept staring at the vultures and did not answer. After a minute, Karn uttered a number of words in the ancient language, and a few seconds later, the pain in Roran's leg subsided to a dull ache. Looking down, Roran saw his leg was whole once more. The effort of healing Roran and the two other men before him had left Karn gray-faced and shaking. The magician slumped against the wagon, wrapping his arms around his middle, his expression queasy. "Are you all right?" Roran asked. Karn lifted his shoulders in a minuscule shrug. "I just need a moment to recover. The ox scratched the outer bone of your lower leg. I repaired the scratch, but I didn't have the strength to completely heal the rest of your injury. I stitched together your skin and muscles, so it won't bleed or pain you over much, but only lightly. The flesh there won't hold much more than your weight, not until it mends on its own, that is." "How long do you think that will take?" "A week or two, perhaps." Roran pulled on the remains of his boot. "Eragon cast wards around me to protect me from injury. They saved my life several times a day. Why didn't they protect me from the ox's horns, though?" "I don't know, Roran," Karn said, sighing. "No one can prepare for every eventuality. That's one reason magic is so perilous. If you overlook a single facet of a spell, it may do nothing but weaken you, or worse, it may do some horrible thing you never intended. It happens to even the best magicians. There must be a flaw in your cousin's wards, a misplaced word or a poorly reasoned statement that allowed the ox to gore you." Easing himself off the wagon, Roran limped toward the head of the convoy, assessing the result of the battle. 5 of the Varden had been wounded during the fighting, including himself, and 2 others had died. One, a man Roran had barely met, the other Firth, whom he had spoken with on several occasions. Of the soldiers and the men who steered the wagons, none remained alive. Roran paused by the first 2 soldiers he had killed and studied their corpses. His saliva turned bitter and his gut rolled with revulsion. Now I've killed, I don't know how many. He realized that during the madness of the battle, Dingus. He realized that during the madness of the Battle of the Burning Plains, he had lost count of the number of men he had slain, that he had sent so many to their deaths he could not remember the full number, and settled him. Must I slaughter entire fields of men in order to regain what the Empire stole from me? An even more disconcerting thought occurred to him. And if I do, how could I return to Palancar Valley and live in peace when my soul was stained black with the blood of hundreds? Closing his eyes, Roran consciously relaxed all the muscles in his body, seeking to calm himself. I kill for my love. I kill for my love of Katrina, and for my love of Eragon and everyone from Carvahall, and also for my love of the Varden and my love of this land of ours. For my love, I will wade through an ocean of blood, even if it destroys me. Never seen the likes of that before, Stronghammer, said Olhart. Roran opened his eyes to find the grizzled warrior standing in front of him, holding Snowfire by the reins. No one else crazy enough to try a trick like that, jumping over the wagons. None that live to tell the tale know how. Good job, that. Watch yourself, though. Can't go around leaping off horses and taking on 5 men yourself and expect to see another summer, huh? Bit of a caution if you're wise. Well, keep that in mind, said Roran as he accepted Snowfire's reins from Olhart. In the minutes since Roran had disposed of the last of the soldiers, the uninjured warriors had been going to each of the wagons in the convoy, cutting open their bandages and bundles of cargo and reporting the contents to Martland, who recorded what they found so Noswara could study the information and perhaps gather from it some indication of Galbatorix's plans. Roran watches the man examine the last few wagons, which contained bags of wheat and stacks of uniforms. That finished, the men slit the throats of the remaining oxen, soaked the road with blood. Killing the beasts bothered Roran, but he understood the importance of denying them to the Empire, and would have wielded the knife himself if he asked. They would have taken the oxen back to the barn, but the animals were too slow and cumbersome. The soldiers' horses, however, could keep pace as they fled enemy territory, so they captured as many as they could and tied them behind their own steeds. Then one of the men took a resin-soaked torch from his saddlebags, and a few seconds of work with his flint and steel lit it. Riding up and down the convoy, he pressed the torch against each wagon until it caught fire, and then tossed the torch into the back of the last wagon. "Mount up!" shouted Martland. Roran's leg throbbed as he pulled himself onto Snowfire. He spurred the stallion over next to Karn as the surviving men stumbled and assembled on their steeds and double-lined behind Martland. The horses snorted and pawed at the ground, impatient to put distance between themselves and the fire. Martland started forward as a swift trot, and the rest of the group followed, leaving behind them the line of burning wagons, like so many glowing beads strung upon the lonely road. A forest of stone. A cheer went up from the crowd. Eragon was sitting in the wooden stands that the dwarves had built along the base of the outer ramparts of Bregan Hold. The hold sat on a rounded shoulder of Thardur Mountain, over a mile above the floor of the mist-laden valley, and from it one could see for leagues in either direction, or until the ridged mountains obscured the view. Like Trondheim and the other dwarf cities Eragon had visited, Bregan Hold was made entirely of quarried stone, in this case a reddish granite that lent a sense of warmth to the rooms and corridors within. The hold itself was a thick, solid building that rose 5 stories to an open bell tower, which was topped with a teardrop of glass that was as large around as 2 dwarves and was held in place by 4 granite ribs that joined together to form a pointed capstone. The teardrop, as Oric had told Eragon, was a large version of the dwarves' flameless lanterns, and during notable occasions or emergencies, it could be used to illuminate the entire valley with a golden light. The dwarves called it Az Sindrazar Narvel, or the Gem of Sindri. Clustered around the flanks of the hold were numerous outbuildings, living quarters for the servants and warriors of Durmgrimston Jetum, as well as other structures such as stables, forges, and a church devoted to Morgothal, the dwarves' god of fire and their patron god of smiths. Below the high, smooth walls of Bregan Hold were dozens of farms scattered around the clearings in the forest, coils of smoke drifting up from the stone houses. All that and more, Oric had shown and explained to Eragon after the 3 dwarf children had escorted Eragon into the courtyard of Bregan Hold, shouting, "Arjit Lam!" to everyone within earshot. Oric had greeted Eragon like a brother, and then had taken him to the baths, and, when he was clean, saw to it that he was garbed in a robe of deep purple with gold circlet for his brow. Afterward, Oric surprised Eragon by introducing him to Phaedra, a bright-eyed, apple-faced dwarf woman with long hair, and proudly announcing that they had been married but 2 days past. While Eragon expressed his astonishment and congratulations, Oric shifted from one foot to foot before replying, "It pained me that you're not able to attend the ceremony, Eragon. I had one of our spellcasters contact Niswada, and I asked her if she would give you and Saphir my invitation, but she refused to mention it to you. She feared the offer might distract you from the task at hand. I cannot blame her, but I wish that this war would have allowed you to be at our wedding, and us at your cousin's, for we are related now, by law if not by blood." In her thick accent, Phaedra said, "Please consider us as your kin now, Shadeslayer. So long as it is within my power, you shall always be treated as family at Bregan Hold, and you may claim sanctuary of us whenever you need, even if it's Galbatorix who hunts you." Eragon bowed, touched by her offer. "You are most kind." Then he asked, "If you don't mind my curiosity, why did you and Oric choose to marry now?" "We had planned to join hands this spring, but Oric continued in his gruff manner, "the Urgos attacked farther than Dur, and then Hrothgar sent me traipsing off with you to Elismira. When I returned here and the families of the clan accepted me as their new Grimsborith, we thought it the perfect time to consummate our betrothal and become husband and wife. None of us may survive the year, so why tarry?" "So why did you become... So you did become clan chief?" Eragon said. Aye, choosing the next leader of Grimston Geatum was a contentious business. We were hard at it for over a week, but in the end, most of the families agreed that I should follow in Hrothgar's footsteps and inherit his position since I was his only named heir. Now Eragon sat next to Oric and Hvedra, devouring the bread and mutton dwarves had brought him and watching the contest taking place in front of the stands. It was customary, Oric had said, for a dwarf family, if they had the gold, to stage games for the entertainment of their wedding guests. Hrothgar's family was so wealthy, the current games had already lasted for 3 days and were scheduled to continue for another 4. The games consisted of many events: wrestling, archery, swordsmanship, feats of strength, and the current event, the Gestarg. From opposite ends of the grassy field, 2 dwarves rode toward each other on white Feldenost. The horned mountain goats bounded across the sward, each leap over 70 feet long. The dwarf on the right had a small buckler strapped to his left arm, but carried no weapons. The dwarf on the left had no shield, but in his right hand he held a javelin poised to throw. Eragon held his breath as the distance between the Feldenost narrowed. When they were less than 30 feet apart, the dwarf with the spear whipped his arm through the air and launched the missile at his opponent. The other dwarf did not cover himself with a shield, but rather reached out and with an amazing dexterity caught the spear by the shaft. He branched it over his head. The crowd gathered around lists let out a resounding cheer, which Eragon joined in, clapping vigorously. "That was skillfully done," exclaimed Oric. He laughed and drained his tankard of mead, his polished coat of mail sparkling in the early evening light. He wore a helm embellished with gold, silver, and rubies, and on his fingers 5 large rings. At his waist hung his ever-present axe. Hvedra was attired even more richly, with strips of embroidered cloth upon her sumptuous dress, strands of pearls and twisted gold around her neck, and in her hair, an ivory comb set with an emerald as large as Eragon's thumb. A line of dwarves stood and winded a set of curved horns, the brassy notes echoing off the mountains. Then a barrel-chested dwarf stepped forward and, in Dwarvish, announced the winner of the last contest, as well as the names of the next pair to compete in the Gasgar. When the master of ceremonies finished speaking, Eragon bent over and asked, Will you be accompanying us to farther endure, Hvedra? She shook her head and smiled lightly. I cannot. I must stay here and tend to the affairs of Ingeatum while Oric is gone, so he does not return to find our warriors starving and all our gold spent. Chuckling, Oric held out his tankard toward one of the servants standing several yards away. As the dwarf hurried over and refilled it with mead from his pitcher, Oric said to Eragon, with obvious pride, Hvedra does not boast. She is not only my wife, she is the... you have no word for it. She is the Grimstar Colvers of Grimston Geatum. Grimstar Colvers means the keeper of the house. The arranger of the house. It is our duty to ensure the families of our clan may there be... Bleh. Too much mead. It is a duty to ensure that the families of our clan pay their agreed upon tithes to Bregan hold, that our herds are driven to the proper fields at the proper times, that our stocks of feed and grain do not fall too low, and that the women of the Ingeatum weave enough fabric, that our warriors are well equipped, that our smiths always have ore to smelt into iron, and in short, that our clan is well managed and will prosper and thrive. There is something among our people. A good Grimsfullers can make a clan. And a bad Grimskarvors can destroy a clan, said Hvedra. Oric smiled and clasped one of her hands in his. And Hvedra is the best of the Grimskarvolsen. Can't even say it myself sometimes. It's not an inherited title. You must prove that you are worthy of the post if you are to hold it. It is rare for the wife of a Grimsporth to be a Grimskarvors as well. I am most fortunate in that regard. Bending their heads together, he and Hvedra rubbed noses. Eragon glanced away, feeling lonely and excluded. Leaning back, Oric took a draught of mead, then said, There have been many famous Grimsfullers in our history. It is often said that the only thing we clan leaders are good for is declaring war on each other, and that the Grimskarvorsen prefer we spend our time squabbling among ourselves so we don't have the time to interfere in the workings of the clan. Come now, Skilfstelva, chided Hvedra. You know that's not the truth, or it shall not be the truth with us. Said Oric, and he touched his forehead to Hvedra's. They rubbed noses again. Eragon returned his attention to the crowd below as it erupted in a frenzy of hissing and jeering. He saw that one of the dwarves competing in the Goskar had lost his nerve, and at the last moment he had yanked his Feldenost off to one side, and even then was attempting to flee his opponent. The dwarf with the javelin pursued him twice around the lists. When they're close enough, he rose up in his stirrups and cast a spear, striking the cowardly dwarf in the back of his left shoulder. With a howl, the dwarf fell off his steed and lay on his side, clutching at the blade and shaft embedded in his shoulder. A healer rushed toward him. After a moment, everyone turned their backs on the spectacle. Oric's upper lip curved with disgust. Bah! It will be many, many years before his family is able to erase that stain of their son's dishonor. I'm sorry to have to witness this contemptible act, Eragon. It's never enjoyable watching someone else shame themselves. The three of them sat in silence through the next two contests. Then Oric startled Eragon by grasping him by the shoulder and asking, "How would you like to see a forest of stone, Eragon?" "No such thing exists unless it's carved." Oric shook his head, his eyes twinkling. "It's not carved and it does exist. So I ask again, would you like to see a forest of stone?" "If you're not jesting, yes, I would." "Ah, I'm glad you accepted. I do not jest, and I promise you that tomorrow you and I shall walk among the trees of granite. It is one of the wonders of the Bjorn Mountains. Everyone who is a guest of the Durmgrimston Jetum should have an opportunity to visit it." The following morning, Eragon rose from his too small bed in his stone room with its low ceiling and half-sized furniture, washed his face in a basin of cold water, and out of habit reached with his mind towards Saphira. He felt only the thoughts of the dwarves and the animals in and around the hold. Eragon faltered and leaned forward, gripping in the rim of the basin, overcome by his sense of isolation. He remained in that position, unable to move or think, until his vision turned crimson and flashing spots floated in his eyes. With a gasp, he exhaled and refilled his lungs. "I missed her during the trip from Helgrund," he thought, "but at least I knew I was returning to her as fast as I could. Now I'm traveling away from her, and I don't know when we'll be reunited." Shaking himself, he dressed and made his way through the winding corridors of Bregan Hold, bowing to the dwarves he passed, who, for their part, greeted him with energetic reiterations of Arjitlam. He found Oric and 12 other dwarves in the courtyard of the hold, saddling a line of sturdy ponies whose breath formed white plumes in the cold air. Eragon felt like a giant as the short, burly men moved about him. Oric hailed him. "We have a donkey in our stables if you'd like to ride." "No, I'll continue on foot. It's all the same to you." Oric shrugged. "As you wish." When they were ready to depart, Havedra descended the broad stone steps from the entrance to the main hall of Bregan Hold, her dress trailing behind her, and presented Oric an ivory horn clad with gold filigree around the mouth and bell. She said, "This was mine father's when he rode with Grimsporth Aldrin. I give it to you so you may remember me in the days to come." She said more in Dwarvish, too softly Eragon could not hear, and then she and Oric touched their foreheads and their noses. Straightening in his saddle, Oric placed the horn to his lips and winded it. A deep, rousing note rang forth, increasing in volume until the air within the courtyard seemed to vibrate like a wind-sawed rope. A pair of black ravens rose from the tower above, cawing. The sound of the horn made Eragon's blood tingle. He shifted in place, eager to be gone. Lifting the horn over his head with a final look at Havedra, Oric spurred his pony forward, trotted out of the main gates of Bregan Hold, and turned east toward the head of the valley. Eragon and the 12 other dwarves followed close behind. For 3 hours they followed a well-worn trail across the side of Thordur Mountain, climbing ever higher above the valley floor. The dwarves drove the ponies as fast as they could without injuring the animals, but their pace was still only a fraction of Eragon's speed when he was free to run unchecked. Although he was frustrated, Eragon refrained from complaining, and he realized that it was inevitable he would have to travel slower with any but elves or cull. He shivered and pulled his cloak closer around himself. The sun had yet to appear over the Bjorn Mountains, and the damp chill pervaded the valley, even though noon was only a few hours away. Then they came upon a flat expanse of granite over 1,000 feet wide, bordered on the right by the slanting cliff of naturally formed octagonal pillars. Curtains of shifting mist obscured the far end of the stone field. Oric raised a hand and said, "Behold, Osnildrathen." Eragon frowned. Stare as he might, he could not discern nothing of interest in the barren location. "I see no forest of stone." Clambering down from his pony, Oric handed the reins to the warrior behind him and said, "Walk with me, Eragon, if you would." Together they strode toward the twisting bank of the fog. Eragon shortening his steps to match Oryx. The mist kissed Eragon's face cool and moist. The vapor became so thick that it obscured the rest of the valley and enveloping them in a featureless gray landscape, where even up and down seemed arbitrary. Undaunted, Oryx proceeded with a confident gait. Eragon, however, felt disoriented and slightly unsteady, and he walked with a hand held out in front of him, in case he should bump into anything hidden within the fog. Oryx stopped at the edge of a thin crack that defaced the granite. He stood on and said, "What see you now?" Squinting, Eragon swept his gaze back and forth, but the fog seemed as monotonous as ever. He opened his mouth to say as much, but then he noticed a slight irregularity in the texture of the mist to his right, a faint pattern of light and dark that held its shape even while the mist drifted apart. He became aware of other areas that were static as well. Strange, abstract patches of contrast that formed no recognizable objects. He started to say when a breath of wind ruffled his hair. Under the gentle encouragement of the newborn breeze, the fog thinned, and the disjointed pattern of shade resolved into the boles of large ash-colored trees with bare and broken limbs. Dozens of the trees surrounded him and Oryx, the pale skeletons of an ancient forest. Eragon pressed his palm against the trunk. The bark was as cold and as hard as a boulder. Blotches of pallid lichen clung to the surface of the tree. The back of Eragon's neck prickled. Although he did not consider himself overly superstitious, the ghostly mist and the eerie half-light and the appearance of the trees themselves, grim and foreboding and mysterious, ignited a spark of fear inside of him. He wet his lips and asked, "How did these come to be?" Oryx shrugged. "Some claim that Guntera must have placed them when we created Alagasia. Out of nothingness. Others claim Hellsvog made them, for stone is his favorite element. And would not the god of stone have trees of stone for his garden? And still others say no, that once these were trees like any other. And a great catastrophe eons ago must have buried them in the ground, and that over time wood became dirt, and dirt became stone." "Is that possible?" "Only the gods know for certain. Who besides them can hope to understand the whys and wherefores of the world?" Oryx shifted his position. "Our ancestors discovered the first of the trees while quarrying granite here, over 1,000 years ago. The then Grimsborth of Durmgrimst and Jeetum, Falmar Lakan, stopped the maining and instead has masons chisel out the trees from the surrounding stone. When they had excavated nigh on 50 trees, Falmar realized that there might be hundreds or even thousands of stone trees entombed within the side of Mount Thardur, and so he ordered his men to abandon the project. This place, however, captured the imagination of our race, and ever since, Nerlin from every clan have traveled here and labored to extricate more trees from the grip of the granite. There are even Nerlin who have dedicated their lives to the task. It has also become a tradition to send some troublesome offspring here to chisel out a tree or two, while under the supervision of a master mason." "That sounds really tedious." "It gives them time to repent of their ways." With one hand, Oryx stroked his braided beard. I spent some months here myself when I was a rambunctious lad of 4 and 30. "And did you repent of your ways?" No, it was too tedious. After all those weeks, I'd freed only a single branch from the granite, so I ran and fell in with a group of Vrensgurn. "Dwarves from the clan Vrensgurn?" "Yes, Nerlin of the clan Vrensgurn. War wolves, wolves of war. However, you might say it in this tongue. I fell in with them because I became drunk on ale, and as they were hunting Nagrin, decided that I too should kill a boar and bring it to Hrothgar to appease his anger at me. It wasn't the wisest thing I've done. Even our most skilled warriors fear to hunt Nagrin, and I was still more boy than man. Once my mind cleared, I cursed myself for a fool, and I had sworn I would. So I had no choice but to fulfill my oath." When Oryx paused, Eragon asked, "Well, what happened?" "Oh, I killed a Nagra, which helped from the Vrengrin, but the boar gored me in the shoulder and tossed me in the branches of a nearby tree. The Vrengrin had to carry both of us, the Nagra and me, back to Bregan Hold. The boar pleased Hrothgar and I, despite the ministrations of our best healers. I had to spend the next month resting in bed, which Hrothgar said was punishment enough for defying his orders." Eragon watched the dwarf for a while. "You miss him?" Oryx stood for a moment with his chin tucked against his stocky chest. Lifting his axe, he struck the granite with the end of the haft, producing a sharp clack that echoed among the trees. It has been nigh on 2 centuries since the last Durmsgriven, the last clan war racked our nation, Eragon. But by Morgathol's Blackbeard, we stand on the brink of another one now. Now? Of all times? Exclaimed Eragon, appalled. Is it really that bad? Oryx scowled. It is worse. Tensions between the clans are higher than they have ever been in living memory. Hrothgar's death and Iswar's invasion of the Empire have served to inflame passions, aggravate old rivalries, and lend strength to those who believe it's folly to cast our lot with the Varden. How can they believe that when Galbatorix has already attacked Trondheim with the Urgles? Well, because, said Oryx, they are convinced it is impossible to defeat Galbatorix, and their arguments hold much sway with our people. Can you honestly tell me, Eragon, that if Galbatorix were to confront you and Saphira this very instant, that the two of you could best him? Eragon's throat tightened. No, I thought not. Those who are opposed to the Varden have blinded themselves to Galbatorix's threats. They say if we had refused shelter to the Varden, if we had not accepted you and Saphira into Trondheim, then Galbatorix would have had no reason to make war on us. They say that if we just keep to ourselves and remain hidden in our caves and tunnels, we shall have nothing to fear from Galbatorix. They do not realize that Galbatorix's hunger for power is insatiable, and that he will not rest until all of Alagasia lies at his feet. Oryx shook his head, and the muscles in his forearms bunched and knotted as he pinched the axe blade between his wide fingers. I will not allow our race to cower in tunnels like frightened rabbits until the wolf outside digs his way in and eats us all. We must continue fighting out of the hope that somehow we can find a way to kill Galbatorix, and I will not allow our nation to disintegrate into a clan war. With circumstances as they are, another Durmgrinsteven would destroy our civilization and possibly doom the Varden as well. His jaw set, Oryx turned toward Eragon. For the good of my people, I intend to seek the throne myself. Durmgrimstgedril, Ledwanu, and Nagra have already pledged their support to me. However, there are many who stand between me and the crown. It will not be easy to garner enough votes to become king. I need to know, Eragon, will you back me in this? Crossing his arms, Eragon walked from one tree to the next and then back again. If I do, my support might turn the other clans against you. Not only will you be asking your people to ally themselves with the Varden, you'll be asking them to accept a dragon rider as one of their own, which they've never done before, and I doubt they will want to now. Aye, it might turn some against me, said Oryx, but it may also gain me the votes of others. Let me be the judge of that, and all I wish to know is, will you back me, Eragon? Why do you hesitate? Eragon stared at a gnarled root that rose out of the granite by his feet, avoiding Oryx's eyes. You are concerned about the good of your people, and rightly so, but my concerns are broader. They encompass the good of the Varden, the elves, and everyone else who opposes Galbatorix. If it is not likely you can win the crown, there's another clan chief who could, and who is not unsympathetic to the Varden. No one would be more sympathetic to Grimsworth than I. I'm not questioning your friendship, Eragon protested. But if what I said came to pass, and my support might ensure that such a clan chief won the throne for the good of your people, and for the good of for the rest of Alagasia, shouldn't I back the dwarf who has the best chance of succeeding? In a deadly quiet voice, Oryx said, You swore a blood oath on Nerlian, Eragon. By every law of our realm, you are member of Durmgrimston-Geatum, no matter how greatly others may disapprove. What Hrothgar did by adopting you has no precedent in all of our history, and it cannot be undone unless, a Grimsworth, I banish you from our clan. If you turn against me, Eragon, you will shame me in front of our entire race, and none will ever trust my leadership again. Moreover, you will prove to your detractors that we cannot trust a dragon rider. Clan members do not betray each other to other clans. It is not done, not unless you wish to wake up one night with a dagger buried in your heart. Are you threatening me? Asked Eragon just as quietly. Oryx swore and banged his axe against the granite again. No, I never lift a finger against you, Eragon. You're my foster brother. You're the only rider free of Galbatorix's influence. And blast it if I've not become fond of you during our travels together. But even though I would not harm you, that does not mean the rest of the Ingetum would be so forbearing. I say that not as a threat, but as a statement of fact.
You must understand this, Eragon. If the clan hears you have given your support to another, I might not be able to restrain them. Even though you are our guest and the rules of hospitality protect you, if you speak out against the Ingetum, the clan will see you as having betrayed them, and is not accustomed to allow traitors to remain within our midst. Do you understand me, Eragon?
What do you expect of me? Shouted Eragon. He flung his arms outward and paced back and forth in front of Orc. I swore an oath in the SWAT as well, and those were the orders she gave me.
And you also pledge yourself to Durmgrimston Geetum,
roared Oric. Eragon stopped and stared at the dwarf. Would you have me doom all of Algasia just so you can maintain your standing among the clans?
Do not insult me.
Then don't ask the impossible of me. I will back you if it seems likely you can ascend the throne, and if not, then I won't. You worry about Durmgrimston Geetum and your race as a whole, whilst it is my duty to worry about them and all of Algasia as well. Eragon slumped against the cold trunk of a tree. And I cannot afford to offend you or our clan or the rest of dwarfdom. In a kinder tone, Oric said,
There is another way, Eragon. It would be more difficult for you, but it would resolve your quandary.
Oh? What wondrous solution would this be? Sliding his axe back under his belt, Oric walked over to Eragon, grasped him by the forearms, and gazed up at him through bushy eyebrows.
Trust me to do the right thing, Eragon Shadeslayer. Give me the same loyalty you would if you were indeed born of Durmgrimston Geetum. Those under me would never presume to speak out against their own Grimsborth in favor of another clan. If Grimsborth strikes the rocks wrong, it is his responsibility alone, but that does not mean I am oblivious to your concerns.
He glanced down for a moment and said,
If I cannot be king, trust me, not to be so blinded by the prospect of power that I cannot recognize when my bid has failed. If that should happen, that I believe not that I believe that it shall, that I will of my own volition lend my support to one of the other candidates. For I have no more desire than you to see Grimsborth elected who is hostile toward the Varden. And if I should help promote another to the throne, the status and prestige I will place at the service of that clan chief shall, of its very nature, include your own, since you are in Geetum. Will you trust me, Eragon? Will you accept me as your Grimsborth, and the rest of my whole sworn subjects do?
Eragon groaned, leaned his head against the rough tree, and peered up at the crooked bone-white branches, wreathed in mist. Trust. Of all the things Oric could have asked, that was the one most difficult to grant. Eragon liked Oric, but to subordinate himself to the dwarf's authority when so much was at stake would be to relinquish even more of his freedom, a prospect he loathed. And along with his freedom, he would also be relinquishing part of his responsibility for the fate of Algasia. Eragon felt as if he were hanging off the edge of a precipice, and Oric was trying to convince him there was a ledge only a few feet below him. But Eragon could not bring himself to release his grip, for fear he would fall to his doom. He said, I would not be a mindless servant for you to order about. When it comes to matters of Durmgrimston Geetum, I would defer to you, but in all else, you would have no hold over me. Oric nodded, his face serious.
I'm not worried about what mission Aswada might send you on, nor whom you might kill while fighting the Empire. No, what gives me restless nights when I ought to be sleeping around as Argon in his cave is imagining you attempting to influence the clanmates' voting. Your intentions are noble, I know. But noble or not, you are unfamiliar with our politics, no matter how well Naswada may have schooled you. This is mine area of expertise, Eragon. Let me conduct it in the manner I deem appropriate. It is what Hrothgar groomed me for my entire life.
Eragon sighed, and with a sensation of falling, he said, Very well. I will do as you think best about the succession, Grimsborth Oric. A broad smile spread across Oric's face. He tightened his grip on Eragon's forearms and released him, saying,
Thank you, Eragon. You don't know what this means to me. It is good of you. Very good of you. And I won't forget it. Not if I live to be 200 years old and my beard grows so long it drags in the dirt.
Despite himself, Eragon chuckled. Well, I hope it doesn't grow that long. You would trip over it all the time.
Perhaps I would at that, said Oric, laughing. Besides, I'd rather think Fedra would cut it short once it reached my knees. She has very definite opinions about the proper length of a beard.
And that, my friends, is where we'll leave this reading of Brisingr, right at a break, where Eragon is about to go and embark on a political journey into dwarfdom, my friends. Ridiculous. Again, thank you everyone that was here in the Discord with me, and those of you who are watching this afterwards. I'm so sorry that I'm going to get compressed. I'm going to be releasing these things more regularly now that I think that I'm a bit more settled at home. I was sick this last weekend, but it's so wonderful to be here with all of you. Again, if you'd like to hang out on Twitch with me, I'm on Sunday, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 Mountain Standard, 7 Central, and 8 Eastern. If you're a creator yourself and you like your own custom sound alerts, I'm also a professional audio engineer that went to school and everything, and I'm also a blacksmith. If anyone ever wants to get their own custom knife, you can find bits of my work on my Instagram. Thank you again, and I will see you all in the next adventure. Much love to all of you.